The day my parents sat me down and told me they were getting divorced, my whole world turned upside down. I was only 12, and I thought divorces were for couples who fought all the time. You know, the ones who screamed about money and slammed doors. But my parents were always so polite to each other. Sure, we hadn't been on a family outing in a while, but I figured they were just busy. Candy, my mom said, her voice weirdly calm. Your father and I have something to tell you. I looked at them, sitting there on the couch, a careful distance between them. Dad cleared his throat. We've decided to get divorced, he said, like he was announcing we were having pizza for dinner. I blinked, waiting for the punchline. But it never came. What? I finally managed to squeak out. But why? Mom reached out and patted my hand. Sometimes, people grow apart, sweetie. Your father and I, we've found other people we want to be with. Dad nodded. I'll be moving out soon. You'll live with your mother, but you'll stay with me sometimes too. I sat there, trying to process this bombshell. My parents were leaving each other for other people? And I was supposed to just, what? Go along with it? Who are these other people? I asked, my voice sounding small and far away. Mom smiled, and I noticed for the first time how it didn't quite reach her eyes. You'll meet them soon. My friend has 2 daughters about your age. Won't that be nice? Nice? My parents were blowing up our family, and I was supposed to think it was nice? And my partner has a son, Dad added, like he was sweetening the deal. I stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over the coffee table. I don't want new sisters or brothers. I want us to stay together. I ran to my room and slammed the door, throwing myself on the bed. I could hear them talking in low voices downstairs, probably figuring out how to rearrange my life some more. I thought about the last few months, how Mom and Dad had taken me out separately. I'd go to the movies with Dad one weekend, then to a cafe with Mom the next. I thought it was cool, getting one-on-one time with each of them. Now I realized it was just the beginning of the end. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Dad packed his bags and moved out, heading off to live with his new wife. Apparently, they'd already gotten married in some quickie ceremony. She had a son, just like Dad had said. Meanwhile, Mom's new husband moved in with us. He brought his twin daughters, who were a year younger than me. At first, I was kind of excited. I'd always wanted a sister to share secrets with, to stay up late talking about boys and life and all that stuff. The day they moved in, I tried to be friendly. I smiled at the girls and said, "Hey, I'm Candy. Want me to show you around?" The taller one, I think her name was Brittany, looked me up and down like I was something stuck to her shoe. "No thanks," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "We don't need your help." Her sister nodded in agreement. "Yeah, and just so we're clear, we're not your sisters. You're just extra." Extra. The word hit me like a slap in the face. I stood there, mouth open, as they brushed past me, giggling to themselves. That night, I lay in bed, listening to the sounds of my new family settling in. I felt like a stranger in my own home. The next day, things got worse. I came home from school to find the twins wearing my clothes. "Hey," I said, shocked. "Those are mine." Brittany rolled her eyes. "Mom said we could borrow them." "Don't be so selfish." I looked to Mom for backup, but she just smiled. Now, Candy, sharing is caring. The girls just want to feel welcome. Welcome? They were wearing my favorite shirt. I stomped up to my room, fighting back tears. As the days passed, it became clear that I was no longer the center of Mom's world. She doted on the twins, buying them new clothes and toys. My stuff started disappearing, given away to my new sisters without my permission. One day, I overheard Mom talking to her new husband. "The girls need new phones," she was saying. "We could use the money we set aside for Candy's birthday." My birthday. She was going to skip my birthday for them. When the day came, Mom barely remembered. "Oh, honey," she said distractedly when I reminded her. I'm so sorry, but the girls have a big sports event today. We'll celebrate another time, okay? But we never did. I thought things might be better at Dad's place, where I stayed every other weekend. But I was wrong about that too. Dad's new wife was pregnant, and she had no time for me. And her son? He was a nightmare. One night, I woke up to a tickling sensation on my face. I opened my eyes and saw a huge spider sitting on my nose. I screamed, flailing around in panic. The whole house came running. As the lights flicked on, I saw it wasn't a real spider, but a plastic toy. And there was Dad's stepson, grinning in the doorway. "What's going on?" Dad's wife demanded, her pregnant belly leading the way as she waddled into the room. "Candy woke us all up with her screaming," the boy said innocently. "Over a toy." "You little," I started, but Dad's wife cut me off. "Honestly, Candy, what is wrong with you? Are you some kind of hysterical lunatic?" I turned to Dad, expecting him to defend me. But he just stood there, looking uncomfortable. "He put it there," I insisted. "He knows I'm afraid of spiders." "Don't be ridiculous," his wife snapped. "Stop lying and go to sleep. I don't want to see you for the rest of the night." I looked at Dad again, silently begging him to say something, anything. But he just sighed and said, "I'll take you home in the morning, Candy." As they all filed out, leaving me alone in the dark, I realized something. I didn't have a home anymore. I was alone. Life at Mom's house didn't get any better. The twins, emboldened by Mom's constant praise and attention, became downright cruel. One afternoon, I came home to find my favorite mug shattered on the kitchen floor. The twins were standing there, looking innocent as angels. "Oh, Candy," Brittany said, her voice syrupy sweet. "We're so sorry. We were just trying to make you some tea, and it slipped." I knew it was a lie. They'd never done anything nice for me, let alone make me tea. But before I could say anything, Mom and my stepdad walked in. "What's going on here?" Mom asked, eyeing the mess on the floor. Candy broke her mug, the other twin piped up. She got angry and smashed it. My stepdad's face darkened. Without a word, he grabbed my arm and led me to the small storage room at the end of the hall. It was dark and musty, filled with old boxes and forgotten junk. "You'll stay in here until you learn to control your temper," he said, pushing me inside. "But I didn't do anything." I cried, but he just shut the door, leaving me in darkness. I heard giggling outside the door. It was the twins. "Hey, Candy," one of them called through the wood. "Did you know this room is full of spiders? Big, hairy ones that come out in the dark." I huddled in the corner, trying not to panic. I knew they were lying, but the darkness seemed to crawl around me. Every little sound made me jump. Hours passed. Nobody came to let me out, not even Mom. When the door finally opened, it was morning. Mom stood there, looking tired. "I hope you've learned your lesson," she said. "Now get ready for school." I tried to tell her what really happened, but she just waved me off. That was when I realized Mom would always believe them over me. I started spending more and more time at my Aunt Sarah's house. She was Dad's sister, and she lived with her husband, Uncle Tom. They didn't have kids of their own, so they were always happy to see me. At first, I'd just visit for a few hours after school. But those hours turned into days, and soon I was spending weeks at a time with them. One day, after I'd been at Aunt Sarah's for almost a month, my teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, showed up at Mom's house for a home visit. I wasn't there, of course, but I heard about it later from a neighbor kid who saw the whole thing. Mrs. Rodriguez knocked on the door, looking concerned. When Mom answered, the teacher asked to see me. "Oh, Candy's with her father this week," Mom said dismissively. Mrs. Rodriguez frowned. "That's odd. I just called Mr. Johnson, and he said Candy was living with you." Mom's face went pale. "What? But, I thought." Mrs. Rodriguez was furious. She contacted Child Protective Services, and before I knew it, we were all headed to court. I sat in the courtroom, now 14 years old, watching as my parents argued over who should take care of me. But it wasn't the kind of argument I'd expected. "You take her," Dad shouted at Mom. "I have a small child. I don't have time for a teenager." Mom scoffed. "Are you kidding? I have a life now. I can't deal with Candy's drama." I sat there, feeling smaller and smaller as they tossed me back and forth like a hot potato. Neither of them wanted me. But then, Aunt Sarah stood up. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and strong. "If I may, Tom and I would like to take custody of Candy." The courtroom went silent. I looked at Aunt Sarah in shock. She smiled at me, then turned back to the judge. She handed some papers to the judge. "These documents show our financial stability. I'm a teacher, and Tom's a doctor. We can provide for Candy in every way." The judge looked over the papers, then looked at me. "Candy," he said gently, "you're old enough to have a say in this. Who do you want to live with?" I didn't hesitate. "Aunt Sarah and Uncle Tom," I said, my voice shaking but certain. I saw the relief on my parents' faces. They didn't even try to hide it. Over the next few weeks, I settled into my new life. Aunt Sarah and Uncle Tom weren't just taking care of me, they were parenting me. They asked about my day, helped me with my homework, and actually listened when I talked. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Uncle Tom asked, "So, Candy, what should we call each other now? We're officially your guardians." I thought for a moment. These people had shown me more love in a few weeks than my own parents had in years. Could I call you Mom and Dad?" I asked hesitantly. Aunt Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, sweetie, we'd be honored." From that day on, they were Mom and Dad to me. My birth parents became distant memories, people I thought about less and less as time went on. My new life wasn't just about Aunt Sarah and Uncle Tom, though. I also got to know Uncle Tom's mother, my new grandmother. She lived nearby and quickly became one of my favorite people in the world. Grandma was a retired doctor, and she had this way of making everything interesting. We'd spend hours in her garden, planting vegetables and flowers while she told me stories about her days in the hospital. And I realized I also want to become a doctor. With Grandma's help and the unwavering support of my new parents, I threw myself into my studies. Before I knew it, it was time for high school graduation. As I stood in my cap and gown, scanning the audience, I saw the faces of the people who truly mattered, Mom, Dad, and Grandma, all beaming with pride. My birth parents weren't there. They hadn't even sent a card. I applied to medical college and, to my delight, got accepted on a full scholarship. Life was good. I had a loving family, a clear goal, and a bright future ahead of me. 3 years flew by in a whirlwind of lectures, late-night study sessions, and clinical rotations. Every time I put on my white coat, I felt a surge of pride, knowing I was living the dream Grandma had helped nurture. That's why, when Mom, Aunt Sarah, called me that rainy Tuesday afternoon, I knew something was terribly wrong before she even spoke. "Candy, honey," she said, her voice cracking. "It's Grandma. She's gone." The world stopped spinning. Grandma? Gone? It couldn't be. We had plans to review my latest paper this weekend. She was supposed to be at my graduation in a year. The next few days passed in a blur of tears and hushed conversations. As we gathered for the funeral, I stood between Mom and Dad, Aunt Sarah and Uncle Tom, feeling like a little girl again, lost and scared. But then came the reading of the will. To my beloved granddaughter, Candy, the lawyer read, "I leave my entire estate, including my house and all my savings, amounting of $1,980,000. I gasped, looking around the room in shock. This had to be a mistake. But Mom and Dad were nodding, small smiles on their tear-stained faces. "Grandma talked to us about this," Dad explained later. "She wanted to make sure you had a solid foundation for your future. We agreed it was the right thing to do." As the dust settled and I tried to come to terms with my newfound wealth, life threw me another curveball. My phone started ringing with unfamiliar numbers. When I finally answered one, I nearly dropped the phone in shock. "Candy? Hi, it's your mother." I hadn't heard her voice in years. Before I could respond, she rushed on. I've been thinking about you so much lately. How are you? Where are you studying? We should catch up. Over the next few days, similar calls came in from my birth father. Suddenly, they were both intensely interested in my life, asking to meet, talking about how much they missed me. Confused and a little suspicious, I mentioned it to Mom and Dad over dinner one night. To my surprise, they burst out laughing. "Oh, Candy," Mom said, wiping tears of mirth from her eyes. "I hate to say it, but I think they might have caught wind of your inheritance." Part of me wanted to ignore them, to pretend I'd never got those calls. But another part, the part one thought I'd long since buried, was curious. What would it be like to see them again? To show them the woman I'd become without their help? Maybe I should meet them, I said slowly. Just to see what they want. Mom and Dad exchanged a look. "If that's what you want to do, we'll support you," Mom said. "But be careful, sweetie. People can surprise you, and not always in a good way." The next day, I found myself standing on the familiar porch of my childhood home. I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. The door swung open, and there she was, my birth mother. For a moment, we just stared at each other. "Candy," she breathed, her eyes welling up with tears. "Oh, my baby girl." She pulled me into a hug that felt stiff and awkward. Over her shoulder, I could see my stepfather and the twins hovering in the background, plastered on smiles on their faces. Come in," my mother urged, ushering me inside. Dinner was a strange affair. The twins were sickeningly sweet, a far cry from the cruel girls I remembered. "We're so glad you're here, Candy," one of them simpered, Brittany, I think. "We've missed you so much." I caught the flash of irritation in her eyes that belied her words, but I just smiled and nodded. As we ate, the conversation took a turn. My mother glanced around the dining room, sighing dramatically. "This old house," she said, shaking her head. "It's seen better days, hasn't it? The roof needs replacing, and don't even get me started on the plumbing." I took a sip of water, saying nothing. My stepfather chimed in. "And of course, with the girls heading to college soon, well, you know how expensive that can be." I pretended to be very interested in my mashed potatoes. "It's such a shame," my mother continued, her voice dripping with fake concern. "The girls are so bright, but with our financial situation." She trailed off, looking at me expectantly. I met her gaze evenly, but said nothing. The silence stretched on, growing more uncomfortable by the second. Finally, I decided to change the subject. "So," I said brightly, "I've been wondering. What grades did I graduate high school with?" I can't quite remember. The color drained from my mother's face. She opened and closed her mouth a few times, looking like a fish out of water. "Well, it was so long ago." Well, my version was completely confirmed. She didn't know anything about my life, my achievements, my struggles. All she knew was that I had money now. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "I think I know why you invited me here," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "It's about my inheritance, isn't it?" The room went silent. My stepfather's face turned red, and the twins suddenly found their plates very interesting. "How can you say that?" my mother gasped, but her eyes gave her away. There was no warmth there, no motherly love. Just calculation and disappointment. "Now, Candy," my stepfather started, but I cut him off. "No, I'm done here. Don't contact me again." And with that, I walked out into the cool night air, leaving behind the echoes of their angry shouts and my own past. I didn't need their approval or their love. I had a real family waiting for me at home. Just a few days later, I found myself standing at my father's front door. The door swung open, revealing my stepmother. Her face contorted into what I assumed was meant to be a welcoming smile, but looked more like she'd just bitten into a lemon. I forced a smile back and stepped inside. As we moved into the living room, I noticed a teenage boy lounging on the couch. He looked up as we entered, and I recognized him instantly, the spider thrower. He'd grown up quite a bit, and to my surprise, he gave me a genuinely friendly smile. "Hey, Candy," he said, standing up. "Long time no see. I'm Jake, in case you forgot." Before I could respond, a whirlwind of pigtails and glitter burst into the room. A little girl, no more than 8, skidded to a stop in front of me, her eyes wide. "Who are you?" she demanded. My father, looking older and more tired, cleared his throat. "Lily, this is your sister, Candy." We settled into an awkward conversation, my stepmother peppering me with questions about my life that I answered as vaguely as possible. Jake, surprisingly, seemed genuinely interested, asking about my medical studies with what appeared to be real curiosity. As the evening wore on, I could feel the conversation steering towards the real reason for this reunion. My father kept glancing at my stepmother, who would nod slightly, urging him on. Finally, he cleared his throat. "So, Candy," he began, his voice overly casual. "We heard about your windfall." I tensed, waiting for what was coming next. "You know, Lily here is quite the little genius," he continued. "We've been thinking of sending her to this prestigious private school, but, well, it's not cheap." I said nothing, my face carefully blank. My stepmother jumped in. "What your father is trying to say, Candy, is that we could use some help. For Lily's future, you understand." I took a deep breath, feeling my patience wearing thin. "Why now?" I asked, looking directly at my father. "Why are you only remembering me now that I have money?" The room went deadly silent. Even Lily, who had been playing with her dolls, seemed to sense the tension. My father started to stammer out an excuse, but my stepmother's face suddenly twisted with anger. "Now you listen here," she hissed, all pretense of kindness gone. "You're obligated to help your family. If you don't, we'll take you to court. We'll demand our share of that money. You owe us." I couldn't help it, I laughed. "Actually," I said, standing up, "according to the law, you're not my family at all. You abandoned me, remember? Aunt Sarah and Uncle Tom are my legal parents now." As I walked out the door, I heard my stepmother's shrill voice and my father's angry shouts, but I didn't look back. I got into my car and drove away, feeling a mix of emotions, sadness, anger, but mostly relief. In the days following my visits to my birth parents, my phone buzzed incessantly. Calls, texts, and voicemails poured in from both of them, each more desperate than the last. "Candy, please," my mother's voice pleaded in one message. "We're about to lose the house. We'll be on the streets. Don't you care?" My father's approaches ranged from guilt-tripping to outright demands. "After everything we've done for you," one text read, "this is how you repay us?" I let them all go unanswered. I focused instead on my studies, throwing myself into my final year of college with renewed determination. One evening, as I was poring over a particularly complex cardiology textbook, my phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. Hesitantly, I answered. "Hello? Candy? It's Jake. You know, your, stepbrother, I guess? Look, I know this is weird, but I wanted to apologize. For the spider thing, years ago. It was a really crappy thing to do." I found myself smiling despite everything. "Jake, that was ages ago. Water under the bridge." "No, really," he insisted. "I've felt bad about it for years. I wanted to say sorry sooner, but you never came back after that. And I swear, this isn't about the money or anything. I guess I wanted you to know I'm not that stupid kid anymore." His sincerity was touching. "I appreciate that, Jake, really." We ended up talking for over an hour. Jake was in his first year of college, studying engineering. He was funny and self-deprecating, nothing like the bratty kid I remembered. By the end of the call, we'd agreed to meet up for coffee the next week. As the months passed, Jake and I developed a genuine friendship. It was strange, finding a connection with someone from my past life, but it felt good. We met regularly for coffee or study sessions, and he became a supportive presence in my life. Meanwhile, my life was moving forward at a dizzying pace. The long nights and grueling exams were worth it when I finally stood on stage, accepting my college diploma. As I looked out into the audience, I saw Mom, Dad, and Jake cheering wildly. My heart swelled with joy and gratitude. As for my birth parents, their messages eventually tapered off. I heard through Jake that they were struggling financially, but I kept my distance. It wasn't out of spite or anger anymore, just a recognition that we were on different paths. One day, as Jake and I were grabbing coffee, he mentioned his little sister, my half-sister, Lily. "She's really smart," he said. "Always reading, asking questions about everything." But my dad and stepmom, they're not exactly encouraging it. I thought about the bright-eyed little girl I'd met briefly. "Maybe," I said slowly, "I could help with her education. Set up a college fund or something. Not for them, but for her." As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The pain, the abandonment, the unexpected inheritance, it had all led me to this moment. I was Dr. Candy Johnson now, with a bright future in medicine ahead of me. I had a family who loved me, a true friend in Jake, and the means to make a difference in a young girl's life.
Alright, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick? What's wrong?" Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I immediately followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was. As the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their inn. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1, if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons. leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." Mike! What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, "I'm moving to the sales department soon." If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. "Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it." On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. "It's still working hours." Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. "Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived." I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. "They look good." "What are you talking about?" "These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. "Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each?" "The tea inside is specially blended for us." "The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one?" As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. "Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay?" I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. "Yes, I'm inviting my father." "That's great. I might invite my parents too." I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.